of what adults who got implants said they needed. So research from the perspective of the user, not from the perspective of people who provide the implants. And really, we could not find any other investigations that focused on this user view. And then our ultimate goal, unlike so much research that doesn't have implications for users, we want to share this knowledge globally with professionals, policymakers, funders, and user and advocacy groups so that we can make a difference in cochlear implant practice and provision. Next slide, please. So this is a short version of what we did in terms of the methodology. We created an online survey with both open and closed questions. So that means some questions with short answers and some places where we asked for comments. We also collected demographic information so that we could figure out what was actually in place, what was going on, who had implants, who were these people who had implants, and then identify areas of need from their perspective, what they needed, what they were telling us they needed. As all usual in all research, we got ethical approval through the university, and then we created some initial versions of the survey and worked with CI users to revise the survey and get a final version. Once we had that final version, we translated it into Italian, French, Spanish, German, Portuguese, and Czech. And then it was disseminated through the CIICA network. And this is where we say such a huge thank you to everyone out there who helped us get the survey to so many different people. Next slide, please. So as Leo was mentioning, who responded to the survey? Now, as we work, we're tweaking our numbers a little bit. It was actually 1,082 people who responded to the survey, amazingly from 40 different countries, with the highest number coming from Germany, and then in rank order, Australia, Brazil, the US, the UK, France, and New Zealand, but there was good global coverage, so 40 countries. And our respondents ranged in age from 18 to 91 years, so a pretty good range of ages as well. But interesting to pay attention to the fact that 10% were under the age of 30, and those would be CI users who probably got their implants at a very young age, perhaps in childhood, so a particular group of interest, with the largest group being between the ages of 55 and 75. Most reported a bilateral hearing loss, but the majority used one implant, and of those who used one implant, 55% had a hearing aid in the other ear. And just before we leave this, Leo commented to you, and this is a little bit of an update that I just learned yesterday. It's not just 2,000 and some comments we have 3,571 comments in all of those languages to go through to find out what CI users had to tell us. So the data is very rich. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit of the initial data. We asked people how often they received fitting, mapping, and programming services in the first year, in the second to fifth year after implantation, and after the fifth year. And you can see there the most common number of sessions in the first year was 4 to 6, but the range was from 1 to more than 12. And as you look at this chart, what it really captures is the variability, that some people had nothing by the second year and other people had 12 plus fitting or mapping sessions. So there's huge variability here. Next slide, please. Then how often did you receive rehab services? This picture here is less rosy. If you look at after the second year and beyond, the most common response was nothing. So most people after the first year didn't get a lot of support, although some people got 12 or more sessions. So again, huge variability. But we highlighted in red the data we found from the first year, because even the most common number of sessions reported was more than 12, which looks great, more than 12 sessions in the first year. But as Sue always said, there's a but the second most common response was nothing. So there really seems to be a problem here in terms of rehabilitation post-implantation. Next slide, please. When we asked people whether they felt the service they received was sufficient, around fitting, mapping, and programming, the majority, 86%, said yes, it was okay. But when you look under rehab and therapy, almost 1/3 of the people who responded said it was not good enough. So that really is pointing to an area where we need to do more work. Next slide, please. Then in terms of who funds the services, and you'll be able to look at this on the website later because we don't have time to go through each of the bullets here. But what we highlighted in red at the end column are the places where CI users themselves bear the burden of the costs of their implant. And you can see that huge percentage of time that users themselves are on the hook for paying for things like streamers and accessories, batteries, spare parts, etc. And we can see how that could be a burden that's maybe not one that every CI user can meet. Next slide, please. Then we asked people what were the most important factors in deciding to get an implant. It's a big decision. What influenced you? How did you come to that decision? The overwhelming answer, 69%, was they decided themselves because of the frustration of their own hearing loss. Advice from professionals like audiologists and surgeons came next. Other CI users had an impact as well. And then family, and perhaps this will disappoint the manufacturers, but their information was the least influential in terms of informing people about whether or not they wanted a CI. Next slide, please. Then which services are most important according to the CI users who responded to our survey? And here, the bigger words at the top are the most important, going down to the ones that were seen as least important, at least in this survey, was regular programming, fitting, and mapping was the #1 thing that users said mattered to them. And coming in a very close second was funding, then access to repairs, rehabilitation, access to technology, family support, and peer support. That's not to say all of these things aren't important. It's just the users in the survey identified regular programming, fitting, and mapping as the most important. Next slide, please. We wanted to find out when people got their implant, did they wear it? 98% of the respondents said they either wore it all of the time or most of the time. And that overall satisfaction with implants, 96% of respondents said overall they were satisfied. We still wonder about why 4% of people were not satisfied, but overwhelmingly, people think their implant was a good choice and they wear their implant all or most of the time. Next slide, please. So what's the take-home message? Because we could imagine that we're painting a completely rosy picture here. And in some ways, yes, when you hear people say, I'm very satisfied with my implant, I wear it all the time. But this quote really captures what we think the survey is telling us. This user says, I am very satisfied. However, it's not perfect, so I wasn't sure how to answer. So in other words, while overall everyone is pretty satisfied, it's more complicated than that. There's a great variation in provision and programming and rehab. We need to look about these distinctions country by country or age group by age group. There seems to be more dissatisfaction with rehab than programming. That lifelong funding is vital, and that we need to consider the amount of personal funding, especially for spares and repairs, in terms of how we move forward in supporting users in working with their implant. And that because users said they made their own decisions, we need to make sure that we provide users with the right information and good information to make informed choices as they go forward. Next slide, please. And so in this final slide, these are the things that the research group is thinking about in terms of next steps. We need to do further work to look at the technical provision and funding. We need to learn more about exactly what's going on there. Right now, as I mentioned, we're in the midst of an analysis of these over 3,500 comments that people made, and they are fascinating reading. We're also doing further analysis of the quantitative data to investigate the impact of global region and other demographic factors. Are there differences among age groups, differences among users of 2 implants or 1 implant, etc.? We will continue to post findings as we get them on the CIICA website, because you are the users and you're the people that we want to connect with. And as well, we'll be producing reports and papers to influence policy and provision for CIICA members and everyone else with an implant going forward. And I think the rest of the talks today are going to add more meat to the bones for some of these ideas going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Connie, for this excellent presentation on this enormous outcomes of this survey. We look forward to the near future, because this is just the beginning of the outcomes what you just presented. Brian, what are some questions in the chat?
Yeah, there are a couple of very interesting questions there. One was from Robert about, it'd be interesting to know, I'm not sure the survey is structured like this, but it'd be interesting to know whether those that had the most appointments had the best outcomes. And then Carol was also speculating that, or at least kind of asking the question, the number of appointments might be related to access and lack of access, but also it could be that they don't need them. And, you know, do we have any views on which of those it might be?
Those are really good questions, and we're hoping that through an analysis of the qualitative data, we're working with a research team who's going to help us with some of this in-depth analysis to tie some of that quantitative data to the comments to see if we can make some of those connections, because those are really good observations. A survey can only tell you so much, and it's the comments that might fill in some of those gaps. So hopefully we'll have more to say on that going forward.
Thank you, Connie.